Carte's Crossing as we continue our exploration of the 10th insight. We're up to the chapter Forgiving. So let's have a look at the Shaman's Oracle. What card are we going to focus on today? Let's have a look. Dancer of Inspiration. So let's have a look at that. Dancer of Inspiration. Okay, Dancer of Inspiration. Here we go. I am the dancer of inspiration. From me comes the magical lightning strike of understanding, an innate grasp of knowledge that transforms everything you undertake. I dance in you at the most essential moments, and when others see me, I can inspire them to the greatest heights of achievement. When you journey with me, you see everything with clearer focus, a greater sense of clarity and conviction. I lead you to the gates of highest wonder. Inspiration can strike us at any moment, bringing a blaze of knowing, of understanding. It can transform anything we do. We can be inspired by anything, and that inspiration grows within us like a flower, revealing in its unfolding a deeper and more profound sense of our purpose. The dancer of inspiration resonates with a measure of inner certainty that cannot be diminished and shines the light of possibility on us. In achieving a moment of revelation, we are also able to inspire others, one of the greatest acts that we can perform as human beings. So interpretations, imaginative conviction, precision, clarity, striking out to fresh territory, appreciation by others, turning the corner, winning, and creative strength. That's today's card to think about. So forgiving. As my head cleared, I gradually became aware of something cold and wet against my right cheek. Slowly I opened my eyes, and the rest of my body frozen in place. For a moment the half-grown wolf looked at me and sniffed hard, his tail bristling. Then he dashed into the woods as I jerked back and sat up. In a tired stupor I retrieved my pack in the fading light and walked into the thick trees and raised my tent. Afterward, virtually collapsing into the sleeping bag, I struggled to stay awake, intrigued by my strange meeting with Charlene. Why had she been in the other dimension? What had drawn us together? The next morning I woke early and made oatmeal, wolfing it down, and then made my way carefully back to the small creek I had passed on my way up the ridge to wash my face and fill my canteen. I still felt tired, but I was also anxious to find Curtis. Suddenly I was jolted to my feet by the sound of an explosion toward the east. That had to be Curtis, I thought, as I ran to the tent. A wave of fear passed through me as I quickly packed and headed towards the sound of the blast. After about half a mile, the woods ended abruptly at what appeared to be abandoned pasture. Several strands of rusty barbed wire hung loosely between the trees in my path. I surveyed the open field and the line of trees and the dense bush 100 yards beyond. At that moment the bushes parted and Curtis burst through and headed in a dead run straight towards me. I waved, and he immediately recognized who I was and slowed to a fast walk. When he reached me, he carefully climbed through the barbed wire and collapsed against a tree, breathing rapidly. "What happened?" I asked. "What did you blow up?" He shook his head. "I couldn't do much. They're running the experiment underground, and I didn't have enough explosives, and I didn't want to hurt the people inside. All I could do was blow up an outside dish antenna, which hopefully will delay them." "How did you get close enough to do that?" "I set the charges late last night after dark. They must not expect anyone to be up here, because they have very few guards outside." He paused for a moment as we heard the sound of trucks in the distance. "We'll have to get out of this valley," he continued, "and find some help. We don't have any choice now. They'll be coming." "Wait a minute," I said. "I think we have a chance to stop them, but we've got to find Mayer and Charlene." His eyes widened. "Are you talking about Charlene Billings?" "That's right. I know her. She used to do some contract research for the corporation. I hadn't seen her for years, but I saw her last night going into the underground bunker. She was walking with several men, all of them heavily armed." "Were they holding her against her will?" "I couldn't tell," Curtis said distractedly. His ears turned to the trucks, which now seemed to be heading in our direction. "We've got to get out of here. I know a place where we can hide until dark. but we'll have to hurry. He looked back towards the east. I set a false trail, but it won't sidetrack them for long. I've got to tell you what happened, I said. I found Will again. Right, tell me on the way, he said, walking quickly. We've got to move. I looked out of the mouth of the cave and across the deep gorge to the opposite hillside. No movement. I listened carefully, but could hear nothing. We had walked in a northeasterly direction for about a mile, and as quickly as I could, I had told Curtis what I had experienced in the other dimension, stressing my belief that Williams had been correct. We could stop this experiment if we could find the rest of the group and remember the larger vision. I could tell that Curtis was resisting. He had listened for a while, but then began rumbling about his past association with Charlene. I was frustrated that he knew nothing that might explain what she had to do with this experiment. He also told me how he had come to know David. They had become friends, he explained, after a chance meeting had revealed many common experiences in the military. I told him it was significant that he and I both had an association with David, and that we knew Charlene. I don't know what it means, he said distractedly, and I had dropped it, but I knew it was further proof that we had all come to this valley for a reason. Afterward, we had walked in silence as Curtis searched for the cave. When we found it, he backtracked and erased our tracks with dead pine branches, and then had lingered outside until he was convinced we hadn't been seen. The soup is ready, Curtis said from behind me. I'd used my camp stove and water to cook the last of my freeze-dried food. Walking over, I made us both a bowl, and then sat down again at the mouth of the cave, looking out. So how do you think this group can build enough energy to have an effect on these people, he asked. I'm not sure exactly, I replied. We'll have to figure it out. He shook his head. I don't think anything like that is possible. Probably all I did with my little bit of explosive was to irritate them and put them more on guard. They'll bring more people in, but I don't think they will stop. They would have had a replacement antenna close by. Maybe I should have taken out the door. God knows I could have. But I just couldn't bring myself to do that. Charlene was inside, and who knows how many others. I would have had to shorten the timer so they would have gotten me, but perhaps it would have been worth it. No, I don't think so, I said. We're going to find the other way. How? It'll come to us. We heard the faint sound of the vehicles again, and simultaneously I noticed a movement on the downslope below us. Someone's out there, I said. We crouched down and looked closely. The figure moved again, partially obscured by the underbrush. That's Maya, I said, disbelieving. Curtis and I stared at each other for a long moment. Then I moved to get up. I'll go get her, I said. He grabbed my arm. Stay low, and if the vehicles close in, leave her and come back here. Don't risk being seen. I nodded and ran carefully down the hill. When I was close enough, I stopped and listened. The trucks were still moving closer. I called out to her in a low voice. She froze for an instant, then recognized me and climbed up a rocky slope to where I stood. I can't believe I found you, she said, hugging my neck. I led the way back to the cave and helped her through the opening in the rock. She appeared exhausted, and her arms were covered with scratches, some of them still bleeding. What happened? She asked. I heard an explosion, and then those trucks were everywhere. Did anyone see you come this way? Curtis asked with irritation. He was up and looking outside. I don't think so, she said. I was able to hide. I quickly introduced them. Curtis nodded and said, I think I'll take a look. He slipped out through the opening and disappeared. I opened my pack and took out a first aid kit. Were you able to find your friend with the sheriff's department? No, I couldn't even get back to town. There were Forest Service agents along all the paths back. I saw a woman I knew and gave her a note to take to him. That's all I could do. I applied some antiseptic to a long gash across Maya's knee. So why didn't you leave with the woman you saw? Why did you change your mind and come back out here? She took the antiseptic and silently began applying it to herself. Finally she spoke. I don't know why I came back. Maybe because I kept having these memories. She looked up at me. I want to understand what's happening here. I sat down facing her and gave her a sketchy summary of everything that had happened since we parted, particularly the information Will and I had received about the group process of moving past the resentment to find the world vision. She looked overwhelmed, but seemed to accept her role. I noticed your ankle no longer seems to be bothering you. Yeah, I guess it cleared up when I remembered where the problem came from. She stared at me for a moment, then said, There are only 3 of us, you said. Williams and Feynman had both seen 7. I don't know, I replied. I'm just glad you're here. You're the one who knows about faith and visualization. A look of terror crossed her face. A few moments later, Curtis came back through the opening and told us he'd seen nothing out of the ordinary, then sat down away from us to finish his meal. I reached over and served another plate and gave it to Maya. Curtis leaned back and handed her a canteen. You know, he said, you took a hell of a risk walking around in that open like that. You could have led them right to us. Maya glanced at him and then said defensively, I was trying to get away. I didn't know you were up here. I wouldn't even have come this way if the birds hadn't. Well, you've got to understand how much trouble we're in, Curtis interrupted. We still haven't stopped this experiment. He got up and stepped outside again and sat behind a large rock near the opening. Why is he so mad at me? Maya asked. You said you were having memories, Maya. What kind? I don't know. Of another time, I guess, of trying to stop some other violence. That's why all this is so eerie to me. Does Curtis seem familiar to you? She struggled to think. Maybe. I don't know. Why? Do you remember when I told you about seeing a vision of all of us in the past during the Native American Wars? Well, you were killed, and someone else was with you who seemed to be following your lead, and he was killed too. I think it was Curtis. He blamed me. Oh, God, no wonder he's so mad. Maya, can you remember anything about what you two were doing? She closed her eyes and tried to think. Suddenly she looked at me. Was a Native American also there, a shaman? Yes, I said. He was killed too. We were thinking about something. She looked at me in the eye. No, we were visualizing. We thought we could stop the war. That's all I get. That's all I can get. You've got to talk to Curtis and help him work through this anger. It's part of the process of remembering. Are you kidding? With him, this anger? I'll go speak with him first, I said, standing up. She nodded slightly and looked away. I moved to the cave's opening, crawled out and sat down beside Curtis. What do you think? I asked. He looked at me slightly embarrassed. I think there's something about your friend that makes me mad. What are you feeling exactly? I don't know. I feel angry as soon as I saw her out there. I got the sense she might pull some blunder and expose us or get us captured. Maybe killed. Yeah, maybe killed. That force in his voice surprised both of us. Yeah, maybe killed. The force in his voice surprised both of us, and he took a breath and shrugged. Remember when I told you about the visions I saw of a time during the 19th century Native American Wars? Vaguely, he muttered. Well, I didn't tell you then, but I think I saw you and Maya together, Curtis. You were both killed by soldiers. He looked at the ceiling of the cave. And you think that's why I'm angry at her? I smiled. At that moment, a light dissonance filled the air, and we both heard the hum. Damn, he said, they're firing it up again. I grabbed his arm. Curtis, we've got to figure out what you and Maya were trying to do back then, why you failed, and what you intended to happen differently this time. He shook his head. I don't know how much of all of this I can even believe. I wouldn't know where to begin. I think if you just talk with her, something will come up. He just looked at me. Will you try? Finally he nodded, and we crawled back into the cave. Maya smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry I've been so angry, Curtis offered. It seems maybe I'm mad about something that occurred a long time ago. Forget it, she said. I just wish we could remember what we're trying to do. Curtis looked hard at Maya. I seem to remember that you're into healing of some kind. He glanced at me. Did you tell me that? I don't think so, I replied, but it's true. I'm a physician, Maya said. I use positive imaging and faith in my work. Faith? You mean you treat people from a religious perspective? Well, only in a general sense. When I said faith, I mean the energy force that comes from human expectation. I work at a clinic where we're trying to understand faith as an actual mental process, as the way we help create the future. And how long have you been into all this? Curtis asked. My whole life has prepared me to explore healing, she told. She went on to tell Curtis the same story of her life that she had told me earlier, including her mother's tendency to worry that she would get cancer. As Maya discussed all that had happened to her, both Curtis and I asked questions. As we listened and gave her energy, the fatigue that had shown on her face began to ease. Her eyes brightened, and she began to sit up straight. Curtis asked, "Do you believe your mother's worries and negative vision of her future affected her health?" "Yes. Humans seem to help draw into their lives two particular kind of events. what we have faith in and what we fear, but we're doing it unconsciously. As a physician, I believe much can be gained by pulling the process fully into consciousness. Curtis nodded. But how is that done? Maya didn't answer. She stood up and stared straight ahead, a panicked look on her face. What's wrong? I asked. I see what happened during the wars. What was it? Curtis asked. She looked at him. I remember we were there in the woods. I can see it all. The soldiers, smoke from the gunpowder. Curtis seemed to be pulled into deep thought, obviously picking up on the memory. I was there, he mumbled. Why was I there? He looked at Maya. You brought me to that place. I knew nothing. I was just a congressional observer. You told me we could stop the fighting. She turned away, obviously struggling to understand. I thought we could. There's a way. Wait a minute. We weren't alone. She turned and stared at me, an angry expression appearing on her face. You were there too, but you abandoned us. Why did you leave us? Her statement stirred the memory I had brought back earlier and told them both what I had seen, describing the others who were also there, the elders of several tribes, myself, Charlene. I explained that one elder voiced strong support of Maya's efforts, but believed the time was not right, arguing that the tribes had not yet found their correct vision. I told them another chief had exploded with rage at the atrocities perpetrated by the white soldiers. I couldn't stay, I told them, describing my memory of the experience with the Franciscans. I couldn't shake the need to run. I had to save myself. I'm sorry. Maya seemed lost in thought, so I touched her arm and said, the elders knew it couldn't work, and Charlene confirmed we hadn't yet remembered the ancestors' wisdom. Then why did one of the chiefs stay with us? She asked. Because he didn't want the two of you to die alone. I didn't want to die at all, Curtis snapped, looking at Maya. You misled me. I'm sorry, she said. I can't remember what went wrong. I know what went wrong, he said. You thought you could stop a war just because you wanted to. She gazed at him for a long moment, then looked at me. He's right. We were visualizing that the soldiers must stop their aggression, but we had no clear picture of how that could happen. It didn't work because we didn't have all the information. Everyone was visualizing from fear, not faith. It works just like the process of healing our bodies. When we remember what we're really supposed to do in life, it can restore our health. When we're able to remember what all of humanity is supposed to do, starting right now, from this moment, we can heal the world. Apparently, I said, our birth vision contains not only what we individually intended to do in the physical dimension, but also a larger vision of what humans have been trying to do throughout history, and the details of where we're going from here and how to get there. We just have to amplify our energy and share our birth intentions, and then we can remember. Before she could respond, Curtis jumped to his feet and moved to the cave's opening. I heard something, he said. Someone's out there. Maya and I crouched beside him, straining to see. Nothing moved. Then I thought I detected the rustling sound of someone walking. I'm going to check this out, Curtis said, moving through the opening. I glanced at Maya. I'd better go with him. I'm coming too, she said. We followed Curtis down the slope to an outcropping where we could look straight down the gorge between the two hills. A man and a woman, partially obscured by the underbrush, were crossing the rocks below us, heading towards the west. That woman's in trouble, Maya said. How do you know that? I asked. I just know. She looked familiar. The woman turned once, and the man pushed her menacingly, exposing a pistol held in his right hand. Maya leaned forward, looking at both of us. Did you see that? We've got to do something. I looked closely. The woman had light hair and was dressed in a sweatshirt and green fatigues with leg pockets. As I watched, she turned and said something to her captor, then glanced towards us, giving me a clear look at her face. That's Charlene, I said. Where do you think he's taking her? Who knows, Curtis replied. Look, I think I can help her, but I have to go alone. I need both of you to stay here. I protested, but Curtis would have it no other way. We watched him as he walked back to the left and down the slope, through the section of woods. From there he crept quietly to another outcropping of rock, just 10 feet above the bottom of the gorge. They'll have to pass right by him, I told Maya. We observed anxiously as they moved closer to the rocks. At the precise moment they had passed, Curtis bounded down the hill and leaped upon the man, knocking him to the ground and holding his throat in a peculiar fashion until he stopped moving. Charlene jumped back in alarm and gathered herself to run. "Charlene, wait!" Curtis called. She stopped and took a cautious step forward. "It's Curtis Weber. We work together at Deltec, remember? I'm here to help you." She obviously recognized him and moved closer. Maya and I made our way carefully down the hill. When Charlene saw me, she froze and then ran towards my embrace. Curtis rushed up and pushed us to the ground. "Keep down," he said. "We could be seen here." I helped Curtis tie up Charlene's guard with a roll of tape we found in his pocket and pulled him up the slope into the forest. "What did you do to him?" Charlene asked. Curtis was checking his pocket. "I just knocked him out. He'll be okay." Maya bent down to check his pulse. Charlene turned her attention to me, reaching out for my hand. "How did you get here?" she asked. Taking a breath, I told her about the call from her office, informing me of her disappearance and about finding the sketch and coming to the valley to look for her. She smiled. "I made that sketch, intending to call you, but I left so suddenly I didn't have time." Her voice trailed off as she looked deeply into my eyes. "I think I saw you yesterday in the other dimension." I pulled her to the side away from the others. "I saw you too, but I couldn't communicate." As we stared at each other, I felt my body grow lighter, a wave of orgasmic love sweeping across me, centered not in my pelvic region, but somehow around the outside of my skin. Simultaneously, I seemed to be falling into Charlene's eyes. Her smile grew, and I realized she must be feeling the same way. A movement from Curtis broke the spell, and I realized both he and Amaya were staring at us. I looked back at Charlene. "I want to tell you what's been happening," I said, then described seeing Will again, learning about the polarization of fear and the group coming back in the world vision. "Charlene, how did you get into the afterlife dimension?" Her face fell. "All this is my fault. I didn't know the danger until yesterday. I'm the one who told Feynman about the insights. Shortly after receiving your letter, I found out about another group that knew of the 9 insights, and I studied with them intensely. I had many of the same experiences you talked about. Later I came with a friend to this valley because we had heard that the sacred locations here were connected somehow with the 10th insight. My friend didn't experience much, but I did, so I stayed to explore. That's when I met Feynman, who employed me to teach him what I knew. From that moment forward, he was with me every minute. He insisted I not call my office for security reasons, so I wrote letters rescheduling all my appointments only. As it turned out, I guess he was intercepting my letters. That's why everyone thought I was missing. With Feynman, I explored most of the vortexes, especially the ones at Cotter's Knoll and the Falls. He couldn't sense the energy personally, but I found out later that he was tracking us electronically and getting some sort of energy profile on me as we tuned into the locations. After that, he could hone in on the area and find the exact location of the vortex electronically. I glanced at Curtis and he nodded knowingly. Tears filled Charlene's eyes. He had me completely fooled. He said that he was working on a very inexpensive source of energy that will liberate everyone. He sent me to remote areas of the forest during much of the experimentation. Only later, after I confronted him, did he admit the dangers of what he was doing. Curtis turned to face Charlene. Feynman Carter was a chief engineer at Deltec, do you remember? No, she said, but he's totally in control of this project. Another corporation is now involved, and they have these armed men. Feynman calls them operatives. I finally told him I was leaving, and that's when he put me under guard. When I told him he would never get away with this, he just laughed. He bragged about having someone in the Forest Service working with him. Where was he sending you? Curtis asked. Charlene shook her head. I have no idea. I don't think he intended to let you live, Curtis said. Not after telling you all that. An anxious silence fell over the group. What I can't understand, Charlene said, is why he's here in this forest in the first place. What does he want with these energy locations? Curtis and I met eyes again. Then he said, He's experimenting with a way of centralizing this energy source he's found by focusing on the dimensional pathways in this valley. That's why it's so dangerous. I became aware that Charlene was staring at Maya, and smiling. Maya returned the gaze with a warm expression. When I was at the falls, Charlene said, I moved through into the other dimension, and all these memories rushed in. She looked at me. After that, I was able to go back several times. Even when I was under guard yesterday, she looked at me again. That's where I saw you. Charlene paused and looked at the group. I saw that we're all here to stop this experiment, if we can remember everything. Maya was watching her closely. You understood what we wanted to do during the battle with the soldiers and supported us, she said, even though you knew it wouldn't work. Charlene smiled, told me she had remembered. We've remembered most of what happened, I said, but so far we haven't been able to recall how we plan to do it differently this time. Can you remember? Charlene shook her head. Only parts of it. I know we have to identify our unconscious feeling towards one another before we can go on. She looked into my eyes and paused. This is all part of the 10th insight. Only it hasn't been written down anywhere yet. It's coming in intuitively. I nodded. We know. Part of the 10th is an extension of the 8th. Only a group that's operating fully in the 8th insight can accomplish this kind of higher clearing. I'm not following you, Curtis said. The 8th is about knowing how to uplift others, she continued. Knowing how to send energy by focusing on another's beauty and higher self-wisdom. This process can raise the energy level and creativity of the group exponentially. Unfortunately, many groups have trouble uplifting each other in this manner, even though the individuals involved are able to do it at other times. This is especially true if the group is work-orientated. A group of employees, for instance, or people coming together to create a unique project of some kind, because so often these people have been together before and old past life emotions come up and get in the way. We are thrown together with someone we have to work with, and we automatically dislike them without really knowing why. Or perhaps we experience it the other way around. The person doesn't like us, again for reasons we don't understand. The emotions that come up might be jealousy, irritation, envy, resentment, bitterness, blame, any of these. What I intuited very clearly was that no group could reach its highest potential unless the participants seek to understand and work through these emotions. Maya leaned forward. That's exactly what we've been doing, working through the emotions that have come up, the resentments from when we were together before. Were you showing your birth vision? I asked. Yes, Charlene replied, but I couldn't get any further. I didn't have enough energy. All I saw was that groups were forming and that I was supposed to be here in this valley, in a group of 7. Presently, the sound of another vehicle far to the north attracted our attention. We can't stay here, Curtis said. We're too exposed. Let's go back to the cave. Okay, that's it for today. Don't forget to check the links down below. Check the links on my channel. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care and blessed be.